All right, CNT125, Chapter 11. We're finishing up with a section here on passwords. So they mention about hashing, and this is something to just be familiar with of what is going on. Hashing means to transfer data through an algorithm. It's not the same as encryption. Encryption, if you think about it, let's say I'm going to encrypt a message and I do the whole substitution. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so forth. Well, once I encrypt and it gets to the other end has to be able to reverse that process to get the original message out. So encryption can be decrypted, otherwise I can't read the message. Well, hashing is not the same. It's not meant to be dehashed, if you will. Hashing is mostly used to ensure data integrity. And this gets used with your login credentials. And what typically happens is the username and passwords are hashed together. So it combines, Doug Brown with password of password, puts them together and stores them. And then what'll happen is, and here's the encryption up top. If I encrypt, I use the encryption key, and here's the encrypted data on the receiving end. I use the encryption key to decrypt, if you will, and get the plain text out. So encryption is meant to be decrypted in some manner so I can get the original message out. Hashing is not done like that. You take your Doug Brown and password and you hash together using an algorithm and you store it. So now you have a stored number, if you will. Well, that's not meant to be decrypted. What is meant to happen is when Doug Brown goes to log in later, Doug Brown and password, the same hashing algorithm gets used and that number gets created. So let's say we had the number, 42 over here. Well, when Doug Brown logs in and does the hashing algorithm, if it shows up as 42, it compares the two and say, well, these are the same, so it must be Doug Brown and the password of password. Otherwise, we would have come up with a different number. So that comparison is like, okay, they're okay. I don't know actually what they type, but that comparison, the algorithm, when we stored it, as well as when the person went to log in, they're the same, so therefore they should be allowed to log in. That is the idea with hashing. The secure hash algorithm, SHA, there's different versions that have been used over the years, SHA 0, 1, 2, and 3. 2 and 3 often get implemented together for increased security, for storing passwords and that sort of thing. This is part of device hardening. When I'm storing all my passwords on database or on a Active Directory database, if you will, storing of the passwords hashed like this is secure way to do this. All right, let's move into authorization. Authorization, the second A now. The authentication was like, who are you? Authorization is like, okay, what are you allowed to do? What are you allowed to do here? So the common way to do that is through role-based authentication, which we're going to get to here in a second. But user access network resources two categories: the privilege or right to execute, install, and uninstall software. So maybe you're allowing people to install things or uninstall. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're like, no, this is company-owned resources. You're not installing anything new. The next would be permission to read, modify, create, or delete data, files, and folders. Again, you might allow that in certain areas, but not in other areas. Again, if Doug Brown is not part of the HR team that does payroll, why are you allowing them to open those folders and modify those files? You should not be. But if Doug Brown is part of HR and payroll, then he should have access to these folders and be allowed to open and modify these files and maybe save them or etc. That is part of the authorization. What are you allowed to do? Well, this is typically taken care of by role-based access control. Role-based is, okay, Doug Brown is an employee that is part of blah team. So when they're part of blah team, they have access to these resources and nothing else. They're able to, kind of like read, write, execute these things, but nothing else. But they might be able to read these two things over here because I would need to be able to see my timesheet, if you will, that kind of thing. So what happens is, as that person is onboarded, with their job title, like, okay, with this job title, you're allowed access to here. And do they have any specific duties? We might give them access to here and here. And this is I think this is the picture from the book, giving the idea of what they are allowed to do. In HR, they would have access to this kind of information, accounting, this act, and IT, and so forth. And again, it's giving you the right to maybe read, but not do anything with it, depending on what your role is. And that all can be handled Things like your Active Directory. What is this user allowed to do? What groups are they part of? This group and only this group, or maybe this group and this group. That would all be handled by, again, your Active Directory permissions, if you will. And let's touch on accounting while we're here. Counting the last A, if you will, in our AAA. Accounting separation of duties. We want to make sure that one person is not single-handedly kind of responsible for everything, or single-handedly responsible for the demise of all kinds of different types of information. Sensitive privileges and responsibilities should be distributed among multiple people. That way not everything is circled around one person. A log file viewer can be installed to make it easier to monitor who is accessing things, who is utilizing things and or doing things. Most operating systems will have logs on. Linux or Macintosh, most logs are generated as text files. Windows, that can actually use a Windows event viewer. And here's a sample of a Linux one with different logs and messages that can be looked at to see what activity is going on. And then you could be scanning through there and looking for anything out of the ordinary. Here would be the accounting event viewer, if you will, for a Windows event viewer. Get it out yet? And here there's different areas and different things you can be looking at. I can be looking at the security. What sorts of things are going on? Somebody failed a login attempt. If I see multiple of those coming from a certain area, then I might be like, okay, what is happening over there? Now, since there are multiple systems using or gathering multiple logs, I might want to have a system that's able to gather all those. And that's what your security information and event management system can do for you. Actually pull all those and look for anomalies, look for anything out of the ordinary. And that would be a way to help with the overall view of what's going on in the network. All right, we'll come back in the next section and start talking about different authentication techniques.